Knative has been gaining quite a bit of traction in the last few years. So if you are using Kubernetes, probably the logical next step is to embrace Knative and give developers the abstraction they need. Today, we are going to talk to members of Knative community to discuss about how Knative fits into the modern enterprise stack, as well as about the new governance model they recently announced. Well, welcome to the show. Welcome to the virtual panel hosted by Rishi Research on the State of Knative. Today, I have an awesome panelists here who are all rock stars in the Knative community, and we are going to talk about what Knative is, how it is going to fit into the modern enterprise stack, the community, and the new governance model. It's going to be interesting. And if you're watching on YouTube or Periscope or Facebook Live, you can add your questions in the comment section there, and we'll try to get it answered by our panelists. Let's start with the introduction, and we'll sort of talk about more after the introduction. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and also share it in the social media so that more people can participate in it. I have with me Michael from IBM. Michael, can you introduce yourself and talk briefly about how you got involved with Knative?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in the serverless space now for, I would say, about 5 years. So have been starting there with Openshift, establishing that in the community, a lot around function as a service. And a few years ago, I got in touch with various other people around Knative, which is kind of the next step in the serverless journey, going on top of Kubernetes. And I've been driving that within IBM since then, driving the overall serverless technical strategy there, and also our adoption in our products. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Awesome. I also have with me Brenda from VMware. Brenda, can you introduce yourself and talk about your interest in Knative and how you got involved?
Sure. So I got involved in Knative because I believe when Knative was first announced, they were looking for contributors. So I actually was one of the first engineers contributing to Knative, I believe. This is many years ago. I currently lead up the serverless team at VMware. And right now I represent VMware on the steering committee. So a lot of my main focus has been around how do we improve the community and get more contributors and that sort of thing.
Awesome. I also have Matt from VMware. Matt, can you introduce yourself, talk about your involvement in the Knative community?
Hi, I'm Matt Moore. I am currently at VMware. I was one of the folks who started Knative a couple of years ago at Google. I sit on the technical oversight committee, and I'm mostly focused on the serving aspect of Knative. Did I miss anything?
I also have Savita from Red Hat. Savita, thanks for taking your time at 1:30 a.m. It's too late for you, but thanks for joining us. Can you talk about your interest in Knative and how you got involved?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me here. I'm Savita Ashture. So I work for Red Hat. So I got to know about Knative when I joined Red Hat in the year 2019. So it was announced in 2018. It already been 1 year for that. So when I heard for the serverless for the first time, the Knative is the first framework I started work on. So I am a contributor to the Knative serving. I started my journey from there.
Okay, awesome. Last but not least, I have Paul from Red Hat. Paul, can you introduce yourself and talk about your interest and involvement in Knative community? Paul, your voice is muted. Can you check if you're...
Party foul. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So I'm Paul Morey. I lead our serverless engineering team at Red Hat. I got involved, I think, fairly early in the project. At the same time that I got involved with our engineering efforts at Red Hat. So kind of going through those initial steps of like taking a group of people that were kind of hacking and turning them into engineering team, and you know, to the best of my ability, like occasionally providing maybe some technical insight into Kube, stuff like that. But my focus has been in terms of the community has been on governance as someone representing Red Hat on steering committee for Knative.
Awesome. My name is Chris Subramanian. I am not involved in Knative community, but my interest in Knative comes from the fact that I was part of the Openshift team when they moved to Kubernetes. So I was involved in what Openshift was doing at the time. So I have been following Knative. At that, when I was at Red Hat, I was pushing for this supporting serverless abstraction. At that time, Knative project was not there. Openshift was there. So we were discussing about it during that time. And then when Knative came, I thought probably that's a very natural outgrowth of Kubernetes community. That's how I got involved. Okay, let's sort of set some context here. Let's define how Knative fits into the modern enterprise stack, and then we will go from there. Who wants to take this? Okay, Michael, let's start with I think I need to sort of put someone on spot here. Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, in the past, like many people have been using Kubernetes a lot for moving existing workloads over to it, right? There's lots of discussion about cloud native applications and so on, but the reality is it's also being used a lot for lifting and shifting existing workloads over to it, and then grow from there. I would say Knative tries to establish a layer of abstraction that makes it easier for people to build cloud native applications where they do not want to have the level of control or complexity in some ways exposed to them, where they are really focusing on the microservices they are implementing and a few control knobs that are important to them from an operational perspective in terms of min scale, max scale, concurrency, and so on. Yeah, I would say Knative really has the ambition to be the developer-facing abstraction layer for Kubernetes, so people don't have to go down into those complexities.
Okay. Actually, before we sort of talk to others about how Knative fits into their ecosystem, I have a question for you. This I wanted to ask because we have been talking about serverless for quite some time now. And the last time we spoke, probably on a podcast or something, it was IBM was totally into OpenWest. So can you walk us through the journey from OpenWest to Knative? Why Knative is a better option than OpenWest from your perspective?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, because like if you look at the details based on where the technologies stand today, there is not too much overlap at this point yet. And what do I mean by that? Like if you look at OpenWhisk has been really very much optimized for function as a service execution, like super low cold start times, super fast scale out times, like scaling from 0 to 1,000 within a few seconds. In many ways, also like bypassing the Kubernetes scheduler. So there is a certain class of workloads that really has those non-functional requirements as hard requirements, and that's where OpenWhisk shines today. If you look at where Knative is at this point in time, it is more targeting workloads where you have like web applications or HTTP serving applications in general written in popular frameworks that you can deploy on Knative, and it auto-scales from there. But what Knative has not yet, and we are in discussions about how to add that, is this function as a service aspect to it, where you have the super fast scaling and the very low cold start time. So over time, I think it makes sense to bring those worlds together, to have the same set of capabilities covered by one code stack, but today they are still serving different sub-markets of applications, I would say.
Okay, let's now move from Michael to either Matt or Brenda from VMware. VMware has VMware Tanzu, and you also have the Cloud Foundry abstraction layer as a part of the stack to support developers. So how does Knative fits into this kind of stack? Who wants to go, Brenda or Matt?
Do you want to take this, Matt, or should I?
Why don't you take it, and I will go after you.
Sure. I mean, I think everyone agrees that like Cloud Foundry is a very popular platform, and there's tons of customers who are using Cloud Foundry today. That being said, I think there's a large opportunity with respect to Knative to capture a lot of like customers like application workloads on Knative. And I think it's really funny because when you look at the two communities, there's a lot of duplicated interests in the two. So I think there's an opportunity there for the CF community and the Knative community to work together to figure out what the future might look like. And I think that's the really fun part, actually.
Matt?
Yeah, so I honestly don't have a ton of Cloud Foundry exposure, interestingly, given where I'm employed these days. But honestly, I think to sort of blend what Michael was talking about with the idea of sort of Knative being sort of the growth of the sort of developer-facing stack up from Kubernetes, right? Like Cloud Foundry is a very great sort of developer-facing platform, right? But historically, it was not based on Kubernetes, right? So I think like just today or yesterday, CF for K8s went 1.0, for instance. And so, I don't want to speak for, the Cloud Foundry community or whatnot, but I think that there are a lot of really interesting intersections, as Brenda said, between sort of the capabilities of Knative and the kinds of things it does and some of the things that are happening within Cloud Foundry. And so as Cloud Foundry starts to look more and more at, running on top of Kubernetes, I think it will be interesting to see how our communities overlap more and more, hopefully more and more, and we sort of can potentially leverage Knative where it makes sense to solve those problems in a common way, because ultimately that was sort of a key goal of the project, right? Even if you don't need all of the pieces of Knative, right? Being able to take the pieces that make sense for you and use them to solve your broader problem.
Okay, so let's now move from VMware stack to Red Hat stack. So I understand how OpenShift fits into the enterprise stack, and in fact, even Michael, you can jump in now that Red Hat and IBM are married at the hips, so probably you can also jump in. So I could see how Knative can sit on top of OpenShift and serve the developer needs. But can you, either one of you, can you walk me through how it fits in with the existing developer tools that was already there on top of OpenShift? How Knative can come in, and what sort of value add it gives to what is already existing in the OpenShift ecosystem?
That's a really good question, Christian, and I'm glad you asked that one, because that was what I was thinking about while I was listening to the other panelists or other folks here talk. And one of the things that I think is important to note about Knative is that when we think about serverless, a lot of times we think about PaaS, we talk about PaaS, but the one thing that I want to make sure that we don't get out of here without addressing is that you don't need to be really doing serverless to use Knative. You can, for example, deliver events with Knative to ordinary kube deployments or URL. So there's some degree of I don't want to use the word synergy, but I don't know that many words, and synergy is one of them. It seems to apply. So for example, if you have an existing deployment in Kube and you want to add event activation to that and scale to 0, that's something that you can do with Knative, provided that your deployment can fit into the fields of pod spec that we support. So it's not like a all or nothing type of proposition. You can mix it in and get, like I said, that scale to 0 and event activation. And you can also use the eventing project by itself to deliver events they might be Knative services, they might be just URLs, something else. So there's more than just shops that have the mindset of like, we're doing X or Y thing, buzzword compliance type stuff. There's more potential use just in that.
Awesome. So, Savita, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a few points. Like as Paul said, like thing is with already on top of Openshift, the serverless has the Knative support all these features. So as a developers with Openshift, he already as a user they already get most of the automation on top of Openshift after using. So with the help of Knative as a serverless solution on top of Openshift, they can get easily the inbuilt features of serverless, and they can easily make use of all these features for their day-to-day development work.
Okay, so this question is open to all of you. Like, let's say I am an AWS customer and I'm using Lambda for my serverless needs. And if I need to have some level of isolation, probably I could take advantage of Firecracker. Why would I use some layer like Knative when I have Lambda and Firecracker in the AWS ecosystem? I know none of you are working at AWS, but I want to understand from the Knative perspective how it can add value to me if I am a AWS customer using something like Fargate, Lambda, and probably Firecracker for whenever I need to have some security and isolation.
So, I mean, we've worked with users who are using Knative on EKS, right? And one of the big reasons that they cite is wanting, the option to straddle multiple clouds. In fact, some of the customers we've worked with are using like bits and pieces from the various cloud providers, which I think is ultimately what a lot of folks think of, will be the end state of multi-cloud, right? Leveraging the most value-added thing from multiple cloud providers. But ultimately, I think that one of the things that's really interesting about it is it provides you with a portable experience that in the sort of serverless style across multiple platforms where you might be running workloads and need to have access to the value-added service from those cloud providers, right? And so, maybe you're using Google for machine learning stuff, or one of the other vendors for one of their strengths, right? And so, having that sort of portable experience and portable sort of set of tools, I think, is really one of the valuable pieces of it, right? And I think, ultimately, I think one of the places where Knative is really very interesting is when, you are running Kubernetes anyways because you have sort of heterogeneous workloads, right? And you may already be running some other stuff on Kubernetes, and now you can sort of get better utilization out of the cluster you're already paying for by being able to run, more workloads on that cluster.
Yeah. I mean, to add to that, I think another important aspect that derives from what Matt just said is you can use the layer of abstraction Knative offers to you as intensively as you like to. But if there is a need for you for problem determination or for other reasons to go deeper, you can do that with Kubernetes sitting below it. So you're not forced to stick to a level of abstraction that's dictated to you by a vendor, but you have the freedom of choice to pick the level that's most suitable for you in your current situation.
Yeah. Fortunately, we don't have a panelist from any of the cloud providers, so we can stick to the multi-cloud team. So I have a few questions regarding the use cases Knative can support. Definitely, portability is important, and I see value there. So Knative can be a very good abstraction as you move from one cloud provider to another. And in fact, as someone who sold Kubernetes as that abstraction in the past, I can totally see the value. Portability is definitely one use case where Knative really shines. But what are other use cases where Knative adds value? In fact, when I say Knative adds value, more value than what Kubernetes can already offer. Can we discuss some of the use cases there?
So, I mean, I think one of the things there we did touch on, right, which is a more focused developer experience, right? And so a little over a year ago, I gave a demo that I really like to talk about. I should record it and put it online, where basically, this is really just focused on the serving aspect of it. And there's really, a lot of value in the other parts of Knative as well, but focusing on serving because that's sort of where my head's at most days. The demo I gave was, host a gRPC service on Kubernetes and all of the pieces you need to put together in order to make that happen, right? It may be doing bidirectional streaming and whatnot. And so there's so many concepts you need to juggle, right? Ingress, service, if you're using Istio virtual service instead of Ingress, deployments, right? And so there's all this stuff that, is sort of a distraction from what you actually want to be doing, which is writing that, gRPC API. And so basically the demo is, okay, stand that up and then look at what it would take to migrate that to a Knative service. And it ends up basically being delete resources, delete, lines of YAML, and it strips it down about 80%, if I recall correctly. And I didn't even set up things like auto scaling or TLS. And so out of the box, Knative gives you a lot. And, you don't have to sort of bend over backwards to configure all of those things. If you want to bring a container, right, you write about, 5 lines of YAML and, go from there. And then the next part of the demo, right, starts to get into sort of rolling forward, traffic splitting, rolling back, which honestly doing those things today in Kubernetes in a portable way is actually really hard because the ingress abstraction doesn't support percentage-based rollouts. You can use sort of proprietary extensions or leverage sort of more focused ingress abstractions like Istio's virtual services, contours, HTTP proxy resources. But when I mean portal, I mean any Kubernetes cluster you're targeting, has the facilities needed to do that. Really, I think a piece of the value, right, is raising the level of abstraction so that your developers don't spend all of their time figuring out how to tune the auto scaler just right. It's got some pretty, how to provision TLS certificates. It's, out of the box, it gives you a pretty sensible default experience that, lets you focus on providing business value.
Okay. I have a specific question for Brenda, but before we go there, I would like to hear from either Paul or Savita on what kind of use cases you are seeing with OpenShift. Who wants to take it?
Sorry, I was getting unmuted. So I think one thing that has come up many times in talking to folks that are interested in using Knative and OpenShift Serverless is things that are like event activated IoT type of things that are close to the edge. So trying to think of an example I can present. Like I've heard everything from functions that are or functions or microservices that are deployed on like streaming boxes to things that are at the level of like a not like a regional data center, but maybe something that's co-located with a customer physical site. That's probably the thing that comes most immediately to mind. If that's kind of what you're looking for. And Savita, this might be a good chance for you to talk about your multi-container stuff, because that's definitely relevant.
Yeah, so I can talk about it. So like usually many of the customers, like internally, whoever use the OpenShift, like they usually ask like how to support multi-container, because they have lot many use cases with that. So that's the one how to make use of, because with the Knative they are getting almost all the built-in features on top of OpenShift. But only thing is like that there was a kind of restrictions, like initially they were not able to use the multi-containers. Because of that, they were not able to solve some of the use cases. So that was the one requirement we got from the usually customers who are using OpenShift. Like if it would be great if we provide multi-container as part of Knative inbuilt features. So I think it's already been added as an alpha features in the upstream Knative. So it will be available as an alpha feature on top of OpenShift also. So it's in progress for the beta and GA part.
Yeah, the multi-container use case is definitely interesting. I will dig in a little more on that. Brenda, I want to ask you specifically, like let's assume I am a Cloud Foundry customer already. I have deployed Cloud Foundry in my organizations. My developers are using it. How do I sort of convince my developers to embrace Knative, or what are the use cases where my developers will be using Knative as the abstraction layer rather than Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, so with Cloud Foundry, we have a lot of users who love Cloud Foundry through and through, and that's where the option for CF for K8s comes in, where you can still use your Cloud Foundry experience and get that on top of Kubernetes. That being said, I do believe that there's a good portion of folks out there who are wanting to be able to like go deeper into the Kubernetes layer as well, and that's what Knative really provides. Knative, gives folks the ability to really customize their own internal experience. Right, I think the concept that we call it within Knative is that it's a set of building blocks. So it's essentially up to each company or customer or end user how they want to use it. And I think for those folks who really want to figure out their own internal kind of like process that works for them, folks who are eager to dig deeper down into the Kubernetes layer, like I think that's what Knative is perfect for.
Okay. So before we get into the discussion on Knative community, I have one question for all of you to answer. In a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I won't even touch it, and 10 being I will just close my eyes and run the production workloads on this stack. So where is the maturity of Knative, like in this scale? Who wants to go? Okay, let me probably put people on spot here one by one. Like Michael, what is 7?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would give it a 7.
Okay. Matt?
So for the workloads that fit, fit the sort of stateless application model, I'd probably say an 8 or a 9. I think that it's, I think that things have been getting, more and more and more stable. So I don't know if folks are having trouble with it, I want to know about it, but my confidence is just going up and up and up.
Yeah.
So
I think what's important to notice, like, which spectrum of applications are we looking at? Like, which kinds of applications? Like Matt said, there are applications which are super straightforward to deploy, but there are other applications which are maybe more complicated or have certain attributes where Knative still has to grow into. So I think that's also what the rating depends on.
Okay. Brenda?
I was going to say 7 or 8 as well. It depends on what type of application, but
This is
the reason why I was chuckling a little bit earlier was because one thing I see the TOC and a lot of the work group leads do is actually dog food Knative themselves to handle a lot of the automation. And I think that has given the community a lot of confidence in how production ready it is. So that's why I would say 7 or 8.
Savita?
Yeah, I'll go with 8 because I see a lot of improvement in a year, that too from 2019 to 2020. So I'll go with 8.
Paul?
So this is a pretty easy question for me to answer because Openshift Serverless, which is what we ship Knative as for Openshift, as serving as GA, which means that if you have a problem with it, you can call Red Hat on the phone and we'll support you. So it's pretty easy to answer. We're going to have eventing go GA in an upcoming release very shortly that the team's working on now. So that's how we feel about it.
Okay. So let's shift gears now and talk about the Knative community. There has been quite a bit of discussion around that, especially after the Istio announcement. So let's dig deeper. And the first question I want to ask about the Knative community is like, why it is an independent community? Why not part of one of the trade associations like Linux Foundation based things? Why not take it to CNCF itself? Who wants to go first?
Well,
I think
I feel comfortable taking a stab at that one.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah, Brenda, you want to start while Paul fixes his issue?
Sure, and maybe I'll just ask Paul and Michael and other folks to jump in where I'm not covering it. Essentially, none of us here represent the trademark holder. We aren't the trademark holder, so we can't make the decision on where the mark goes. That being said, I think with one of the recent community changes that have been made, we've introduced the concept of trademark committee, where vendors who are essentially contributing heavily to Knative are able to influence where the mark now goes. This is a relatively new concept, though. I believe the trademark committee is official within a month or so after the steering elections happen. But that's the intent, and that's kind of the reason why, and that decision will eventually be on the trademark committee.
Okay. So, Paul, you want to go?
it sounded like I caught the tail end of a really good answer from Brenda.
Okay. So how do you feel as someone who is not a trademark holder? Do you feel comfortable working on a project where the trademark holder could sort of take it in any direction, especially with all the criticisms that came after Istio? In fact, the very virtual panel idea came when I was listening to Paul Gelsinger talking about Google being a bad player in open source during one of the VMworld keynote. So are you folks comfortable working in a community where the trademark holder is not willing to put it in a independent body?
So, I mean,
Well,
I think
let's see if the app cooperates with me this time. Oh no.
No, it's okay. At least
Sorry,
I
Matt.
could hear you. Yeah.
From where? Yeah. From where I'm sitting, if you think about what type of influence there is, like there's really more than just a trademark. And one of the things that is pretty clear, thinking back over the last few months and what's happened in the history of this project, is that aside, trademark matter notwithstanding, I think the community has a lot of influence over this project, and that it's easy to kind of lose the big picture, and if you focus on that one trademark dimension. But I'm very convinced that with that, like the community participation that we had during this whole thread, with sorting out the governance, that we probably would have landed in a different place, and that means a lot. So
Okay.
I think we've exerted a great amount of control aside from the mark.
Okay, we will come to governance. Before that, let me sort of put Michael on the spot and ask him, are you comfortable from IBM perspective? Because when Istio came out, I heard from some people that IBM was not comfortable with the way Google was handling trademarks. Are you comfortable from IBM perspective?
Yeah. So when we joined the project, like early on, even before it was public, like when it was still called Elafros, we had these conversations already early on, and in the past there have been various projects which started in a similar way, like one vendor starting the project, having control over it, and us working with that vendor and other vendors to get it into an open foundation. So are we comfortable with the status quo as the end state? I would say not, right? We want to work towards putting it into an open foundation, but like Paul said, over the last few months, we made great steps forward towards that end goal.
Okay. Can you then explain what the end goal? Can anyone explain what the end goal is and how the governance model that is put in place will take the community towards that end goal?
Yeah, I think the end goal is to have it into an open foundation where there is no single vendor dominating any important aspect of the project, right?
So does it mean it's a Linux Foundation kind of trade association, or Apache kind of more community-focused association foundation?
Yeah, these are good examples, right? But they don't have to be. It doesn't have to be one of those two, but these are good examples for what we have in mind there.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to join?
I can say one point, like with this open governance, what I can see is like every time there are some rules and things are there, like TOC member can elect and all those things. So this way a new member can get an opportunity who are contributing to the Knative. So this is a like good kind of interest area as part of open governance.
Okay. Anyone else? Matt or Brenda, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the project's come a long way with respect to open governance in the last year. If you rewind the clock back to summer of 2019, and it was largely this way before that, right? There was no clear process for how you reached the TOC. There was no clear process for how you reached steering, and that was before the trademark committee even existed. So, I think that the two big things that have happened, over the past year is we have established a process for how folks are elected to the TOC and run our first round of elections. And so we now have a TOC that no single vendor has a majority. And we basically reached we're on our way towards reaching a very similar state with respect to steering. And you know, a lot of the aspects in the sort of steering elected model, you know, derive from what I think we did fairly successfully with the TOC. And a lot of the things that went into that, I think, were sort of interesting changes that were bigger changes than what we did when we changed the TOC model, such as seats being held by individuals and, you know, elected model and everything. So, you know, I think that we've made, you know, it's very incremental and at sometimes painfully slow process, but I think, or progress, but we are making sort of good incremental progress towards that. And, you know, a year ago when, you know, we were having community meetings and folks were asking about it, a lot of folks were saying, you know, why not Foundation, right? And, you know, the response at the time from Google was, you know, going to a foundation doesn't fix governance. And so I think that we've actually had a pretty good focus on fixing sort of the aspects of governance that go into things. And, you know, honestly, you know, the main thing for me, you know, you asked, would we be involved in the community? I mean, we are, right? And really the main thing that, you know, makes me want to engage in these activities is making sure that we have set up a community that is welcoming to folks who, you know, previously might have looked at the model and been like, no, I don't want to get involved with that, right? And so, you know, we want to make sure that folks feel like they can come and get involved. And if that's not the case, I'd like to know. So reach out to me.
Yeah.
Or
so
anyone
to
on the
add
call.
to it? Yeah.
I think there's one
to...
thing I want to add to that, actually. If you take a step back, I know, where are we? We're like October 2020. A lot of these changes that were made, or a lot of when these ideas were thought of, was actually December 2019, I believe. Paul, Michael, and I, and some of the past steering members met for the first time in person in New York when we could travel. And that's when we actually just took a whole day to plan out, all right, where are the gaps in our community at the moment? We hear that it's unclear how someone might move up into a leadership role or eventually be on the TOC or steering it, et cetera. And we came up with a few things, right? So other than the TOC elections that Matt talked about, there's also the introduction of an execution lead. I think one thing that's personally really important to me is, like, all contributions are welcome. It doesn't just have to be code contributions. So that was the intent of the execution lead. In all our election processes, there's always an exception process. We understand that, like, non-code contributions are hard to capture, but that was the intent of having an exception process around every election. And this was only last December. I believe the TOC elections happened in March. So if I take a look back of this past year, I think we've actually come a really long way. And I think we're eager to hear feedback where it's not working for folks, but we feel pretty confident about this current model.
Okay. So I see a lot of optimism among all the panelists that the community has come a long way compared to what it was probably a few months back. So I want to hear from each one of you, what is one area around governance where there could be more improvement, which will go into making this project even more sustainable? Let's start in reverse order.
Okay.
Paul?
I have something maybe that bridges the, I have maybe something that bridges sort of the last question and the one you just asked. And I think the theme that probably folks are hearing is that we introduced clarity, right? One of the things that we had heard was that the absence of that clarity made it harder for people to understand exactly how they could develop influence if they were to engage with the project. And I think to think about like what sets us up for where we want to go. Open source is people, right? And the best thing that we can do overall for the health of our project is to grow the number of people, grow the community. My hope is that the changes that we've made introduce enough clarity to give folks that maybe they're already consuming the project and maybe they're thinking about getting involved, to give them enough clarity to know that with confidence that they can develop the level of influence that they want, either as individuals or at the level of a vendor that's participating in the project. So if that makes sense, when I think about the conceptual framing of it's all people, right? And we want to grow the number of people, probably if I think about where we want to go a year from now, I think it would be fantastic to be looking at expanding the steering committee to add some more seats so that we could have some additional folks present. The committee size that we'll be going to with the next elections is 5, and we've talked about, as the community grows, potentially upping that number to a nice round 7. And I think that would be great to be in a position of needing those additional seats to be elected next year. If that makes sense, thinking about a year from now.
Yeah, definitely. Savita?
Yeah, so I agree with Paul, like whatever statement he said. Thing is like, as we said, like there is a lot of improvement from last year to this year. So I believe like we should keep on engaging with the people and ask their opinion, and based on their inputs, we should improve. Right now, I don't have any such particular things in my mind to say like what needs to be improved.
Brenda?
I think for me, and I think we're on the way there, is the steering elections. I think I'm super hopeful for that. I think one thing I would love to see a year from now is just like a new set of contributors. I think this sounds a bit twisted, but I think it's a good sign if we see new folks on the TOC committee and on the steering committee, because I think that's a good sign that we've defined a really good process and our community has grown. So that's what I'm hoping for next year.
So are you seeing right now, I think the community is mainly the contribution is coming mainly from the vendors. Are you seeing more contributions coming from the end user side, like maybe customers?
I candidly haven't taken a look at dev stats lately, but I think there are.
Yeah, there's a few actually significant contributors from who are end users as well. Top of mind, Muru comes to mind, who's I think fairly involved in CLI, and he's been dialing into our Friday hacky hour Zoom call, where we basically have a little open Zoom and socialize a little bit, and folks are welcome to come bring their demos and show what they've been working on. And so I believe they're using it at his company, but there's one example top of mind. There's
okay, Michael, where do you think there should be improvement?
Yeah, I agree with the direction that the others described as well. I think whatever we have to change in order to let the community grow, that's what we should be doing. We talked about some of the steps already before, but like I'm looking at this from the perspective of achieving that goal and deriving from that the actions, versus saying we need to have these actions. Because I think Brenda said it, we need to get more input from other community member candidates to understand if there is something that holds them back, and then address that. we've done that over the last several months with the steps we went through with the trademark committee and the new composition of the steering committee and so on, and the definition of the roles, so people find an easier way to engage. But whatever we need to do beyond that should be derived from the goal of growing the community, because that's all that matters really in this context.
Okay. So the first part of this question is mainly aimed towards Brenda as well as Savita. But the second part, I want anyone to jump in and answer. So Brenda and Savita, do you feel inclusive in the Knative community? That's the first part of my question. So the second question is, there are many men who are ignorant about how to treat other gender. That includes me. So what are some of the best practices you think will help open source communities become more inviting and inclusive to people who may not fit with the majority of the people there, which is unfortunately today it's men. So how can we make communities more inclusive and accessible?
Did you want to start or should I start?
You can start it.
Sure. So to answer the first question, yes, I do feel very included. I can share my own experience. When I first started contributing to Knative, I actually met Matt and a bunch of TOC members in person when we weren't even working at the same company before at KubeCon. I'm not sure where it was, but everyone was super friendly. Everyone, recognized, said hi to me, invited me on the Knative meetups, etc. at KubeCon. So I think I personally felt really included in the community. To address the second point, I think just having good facilitation in meetings can go a really long way to make sure everyone feels heard. I'm personally the type that generally stays pretty quiet until there's a silent pause. And I think as members of the community, calling on certain people who might be a bit too quiet and giving them a chance to share their thoughts can go a really long way.
Yeah. Savita?
So for me also, like when I started contributing to Knative, I got a really good help from the team, and you can say company, and even from the community itself. Like they encouraged, like I started with the very basic issues like bug fixes and all, and later started contributing to feature. It all possible with the help of community. And the second thing is, like when you ask like what make to join things, like so we should get a chance to contribute and join to meetup and all those things. And thing is, like we should encourage more, like we should start some programs, like how to make more female members to join and contribute. So it's up to like most of the time in the Knative community right now, the participation of contribution is from the particular vendors, like we can say IBM, Red Hat, Google, VMware. So it depends on the team, like how many members they have from their team to contribute. So yeah.
Okay. So anyone else wants to take the second question, which is how can we make open source communities more inclusive and accessible?
Yeah, I think Brenda already gave great
examples
for that. Yeah.
And I think Brenda's point about asking people who are quiet to talk is a very valid point. I think it will definitely help in the case of gender inequality, but also it helps in the case of people who are like introverts. Like I have seen so many talented people who stay quiet in any community. I think that's a very good point from you. I agree. Anyone else wants to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think having...
Sure, can you all hear me? I think my audio is on a delay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, Paul. Okay, we'll put you on spot now.
Okay, sure. So a couple things is when we think about how to make open source more inclusive, I'm a strong believer in having code of conduct as defining, the acceptable acceptable ways to interact with folks and community norms. I think those are really important. I'm glad that we have a strong code of conduct in Knative, but I think, you know, if you look at like open source in general, certainly not every project does. Different communities value those things differently. I personally believe they're important to having inclusive projects. And I think since probably a lot of the folks, as you point out, are male, like my best advice I can give to other dudes in the audience is listen more, right? And then one final thing that comes to mind is since we all have different ways that we process information, different thought processes around how fast we can think of stuff in the moment. One actionable thing that you can do that I think we do a decent job of in Knative is lazy consensus. And that is basically the idea that decisions are not made in person just like that, that folks that maybe they couldn't make the meeting, maybe they just are more the personality type of they'll think of things later versus think of things on the spot. That lazy consensus of we think this is the decision that we're going to converge on, we want to give other people a chance to speak asynchronously, is something that can help make sure that everybody has a chance to get their say.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, so to echo bits of what everyone said, I think, having sort of being inclusive of different sort of people are more comfortable with different sort of ways of communicating. And this could be some folks are quiet, some folks, if you Jacques just appeared on my screen.
Yeah, I just added the comment there. Like he is sort of agreeing to what Paul said. Yeah.
So I know I have a tendency, if you get me going, I'll just talk and talk and talk and talk. So I try not to sort of interject and talk over people. I literally raise my hand in a lot of meetings. But I mean, I think being inclusive in terms of how we communicate, all kinds of things, spans to a lot of different things, right? What Paul mentioned around sort of lazy consensus, making sure that, we do things like record meetings for folks who can't attend at that time, right? We have some working groups that have representation from, multiple time zones that are impossible to pick a time for, where they'll alternate to try and, make it so that folks can attend at reasonable times. Using mediums like Slack, where folks who may not be, awake at the time of a conversation can catch back up. Trying to, make sure that the various discourse and decisions are sort of available so that folks can sort of track that back, I think is part of it. But, being mindful that people communicate in different ways and not forcing them to communicate in your way is, I think, a really important thing, to consider.
Yeah. Awesome. I think as someone who is part of the ignorant breed of people, like I think I learned a lot from some of the things we discussed here today. So we are almost coming close to the end of the hour. Like we need to wind up. So before we go, I want to ask each one of you, where do you see the project going in 5 years from now? So let's start with Michael.
You say 5 years?
Yeah, that's right. 5 years.
Oh, 5 years is a long horizon. I think the ideal goal where we should end up with is that Knative becomes the kind of default layer of abstraction for people who want to run cloud native applications on top of Kube. So that there is a much simpler way for people to deploy those applications, and also a broader spectrum of applications, like maybe more data-centric ones and so on.
Awesome. Brenda?
I would plus one what Michael said. I believe that Knative should be already on every kube cluster. I believe that Knative should become just a thing that's always on your kube cluster that we don't even talk about it anymore.
Yeah. Matt?
So I think the way I'd characterize it, different spin, same thing. Hopefully Knative gets to the point where it's boring, right? And it's something that you can sort of expect to be available and take advantage of without needing to go do a whole ton of work to configure it and whatnot. It's either preloaded or really easy to get access to. And I think the other dimension of it, I think, is now that we've sort of arrived at an increasingly stable model, right? Eventing has a V1 API, serving has a V1 API. I think seeing a much broader set of integrations with those abstractions in terms of event sources and whatnot that really just will encourage folks to sort of operate within that model and take advantage of the facilities we're providing.
Savita?
Yeah, so I assume 5 years will be a little too much time. So it's for Knative is already become a more popular and a stable kind of thing. So I assume, in my opinion, it becomes same like a Kubernetes way, because right now we can say Knative has a lot of plug-in, plug-out models, and it is acting as a kind of platform for many of the serverless applications. So I believe it almost becomes like a Kubernetes, like how Kubernetes has its own thing. Like Knative is also become like a platform on top of Kubernetes, kind of area like a Kubernetes.
Paul?
Space.
Yeah, I think that's something.
Kind of using humor, but not exactly joking. Like I would love to have to know about Knative going to space.
Yeah, I
I'm
hope.
actually I'm wearing like a Apollo Soyuz t-shirt right now. So space is on my mind, but I'd love to
Awesome.
see it in space.
Awesome. I hope, I know the parody account Cloud Opinion used to make fun of Kubernetes going to space, but I'm pretty sure we will soon see Knative going to space. Thank you very much. It was a great conversation, and it was great having you, all of you. Thank you very much for your time. And hopefully down the lane, maybe a year from now, we can come back and talk about the state of Knative community in 2021, when probably we can freely go out and not get stuck inside the house. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.